Hi guys, my name is Joel, and recently I was in an upcycle competition and I have to tell you all about it, duh. So imagine you're walking down the street, going to the thrift store, seeing the city, you come across a sign that says upcycle competition and it starts this weekend. You're like, oh girl, I'm about to do this. So I moseyed on over to the vintage store. I'm thumbing the rack of the upcycle pieces that we can use. I find 3 items that I love. So I found this first dress that had a black velvet bodice and then like a full skirt with stripes on it. I loved the stripes. I thought they were beautiful. I found a second dress that was a similar stripe but in a different color. So it was like a champagne and black color. And then I found a full velvet black robe. Once I had all of my pieces, I came back home and I started thinking about what I actually wanted to make. I knew off the bat I wanted to make a shoe, and I have been loving boxing boots. I think boxing boots are genuinely so cool. I love the way that people style them. I think they just give such cool girl. Let's get into the process of me making this shoe. Alrighty, so to start this process, we started out by taping out the last. I used a combination of painter's tape and scotch tape, and I really like painter's tape. I might be using that going forward. I feel like it just covered so much more of the last than just the scotch tape. After that, I started making a little draft of my leg, knowing the circumference that I wanted, and then pasted that to the top of the last and kept it pushing. We started actually going through the style lines because I knew specifically what I want and the height that I wanted. So at this point, we drew everything out, cut it out, and began to place the pieces from the last onto some craft paper. I was scared at this point because I didn't think I was gonna get it off in one piece, but as you can see, we got a good little pull of the tape. Once everything was down on the separate piece of craft paper, I used a tracing wheel to trace all of my pattern pieces out so I wouldn't have to cut up my original pattern just in case I wanted to use it again, and this is how my pieces were looking. So now it was time to actually seam rip the dress and get this fabric together. So I opted for seam ripping instead of actually cutting the pieces out because I wanted to have as much fabric as possible. At this point, I could tell that it was a handmade dress, so I kind of felt bad, but it was like, girl, I need to do the project. So we were on to actually cutting out all the pattern pieces. This was a little doozy because it was like I didn't have full pieces to do like a flip method, so I had to just keep flipping the pattern and cut and then flip the pattern and cut because I couldn't fold the fabric. You know what I'm saying? But it turned out good. Then we started making piping. Y'all, this whole project could have been just me making piping. I knew I wanted a lot of piping, but it was like, I didn't think I was gonna make this much piping. As you can see to the side stripe, there was piping on that. I sewed that onto the shoe and it was looking beautiful. I was loving it at this point. It didn't look like much, but it was cute. So then we started adding another stripe to the back that had, you guessed it, more piping, and we had to sew all of that down. Looking back, I probably would have sewn the back strap before I closed up the toe, but you live and you learn. So at this point, we had our outside fabric and our lining all constructed. I also added interfacing off camera just because the fabric was a little flimsy and I needed some more body and weight to it. So now I pinned up the upper edge of both of the lining and the outside fabric and sewed those down because that's where our shoe would come together. As you can see, things got low. I was confused for a second, but we got it together. So I stuffed the lining inside of the outside fabric, if that makes sense, as you can see, because this is how the shoe would be once it's on your foot. Then I pinned around the entire opening and later sewed that down. So I wanted to make sure at this point that everything was super flat, that everything was in the right place since I was going to be sewing it right after pinning it down. So now we moved on to actually constructing the lacing bar, and I attached it at the inside seam. And this is how I knew which foot it was gonna be, whether the seam was on the inside right or on the inside left. Because if I didn't have that seam right there, I wouldn't have known which foot it would have went on to. So once that was all done, guess what we did next, girl? More piping. I told y'all, this whole project was just piping. And after all of my yards of piping was added on to the outside of the lacing bar, we then sewed it down so beautifully with a zipper foot. Definitely recommend using a zipper foot or a piping foot for this step. Now we were on to actually adding the lacing bar to the shoe. So I pinned it all around the shoe where I knew it would go, which was around the opening, the toe, and the inside. And I also added my lacing tabs at this point because this is how I would lace it up. After sewing that down again, we was looking like something. Look at that. She's coming together. She's a boot. So now it is time to actually start lasting the shoe and putting everything together. I started off by tracing the bottom of my shoe to bag stiffener. I didn't have text on board, but I think bag stiffener and text on board might be the same thing. If you got one but not the other, this is very niche. I just be crafting, so I had this. But in case you do, you should use it as well. Then we added our bag stiffener soles to the bottom of my shoes. If you guys remember the last video where I added milli put to my shoes to make the square toe, this is the aftermath of how they looked. I had to use a heat gun, a chisel, and a mallet to get it off, but I would do it again. So back to what we were actually doing. I put my little boot over my last. As you can see, I added some little dash marks on the inside of the lining because I knew that's how far I would last down to. And then I started cutting near the arch part of the shoe, and I went in with my leather cement glue. And if you have any recommendations for what glue to use when using fabric, I would greatly appreciate it. I feel like I should have used a different glue because I feel like the glue did not adhere to the fabric as well as it does leather. But it is called leather cement, so I don't know what I was thinking it was gonna do. I will say it was a little harder lasting the fabric because it was so slippery and it just easily wrinkled at the shoe and the base of the shoe. So this was a little harder, and I will say my lining, she wasn't straight, but she got the job done. Then we started heating up our heel counter and adding that to the back of the shoe just to add some stiffener. This really helps with this shoe to give it some body. Then I went in with the toe puff and heated that up and added it to the front. Looking back, I don't know if I would have done this again because I did want more of an athletic shoe, and I think this gave it a little bit more rigidity than what I was looking for, but it turned out well. And look at our girl looking like a little boxing boot coming together. So now it's time to actually start adding on the soles. And since I wanted like a Puma Speed Cat sole, I went out and found myself a Puma Speed Cat to take the soles off of. So I started off by taking out all the shoestrings from the shoe and also removing the insole of the shoe. And then we proceeded to put our shoe in the pot. And this is your crafting pot. This is not your cooking pot, okay? As you can see, the glue started melting and the sole came away from the part of the shoe. I then used acetone and just rubbed it all the way around, and that just glided the sole off of the shoe. So if you're interested in doing this in the future, I definitely recommend acetone and boiling water because they do the trick, but you're probably not gonna be able to use those uppers again. And at this point, these soles were wet from the acetone and the water, so we needed to wait 24 hours before we could start using them. Once we waited, I was able to start using my toxic glue, which is our cement, and put it all the way around the shoe, on the sole and on the shoe, making sure I got into that lip on the sole and on my shoe so that the glue would adhere everywhere. As you can see, we just brushed it on really nicely, making sure it was really good and had a nice coat up there. This was difficult for the fabric because it felt like the fabric just kept seeping it in, but we got it done. Then I slowly added the sole onto the shoe, pushed it around, made sure everything was done, and our shoe was ready to go. Okay, back to why this video was made. I know you're asking, Jewel, did you win the competition? Drum roll, please. No, I did not. But I had a great time. I feel like the project runway designers, like where they make something they're really proud of and the judges hated it, but like they're like, I'll die on that hill. And it's like, that's how I feel right now. I'm very proud of myself. I didn't win, but I think I did a great job. But yeah, like and subscribe. See you guys in the next one. Bye.